Reflections on the Good News of Jesus Christ for the 17th Sunday of Ordinary Time from the Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus said to his disciples, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure buried in a field, which a person finds and hides again, and out of joy goes and sells all that he has and buys that field." Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant searching for fine pearls. When he finds a pearl of great price, he goes and sells all that he has and buys it. The good news of the Lord. The transformation began when his expensive sports car caught fire last fall. They were suddenly a one-car family. For the first time in 30 years, they were learning to negotiate who gets to use the remaining car, for how long, and on what justification. But it turned out that these two later-in-life adults, even if still employed, didn't need two vehicles. And, as Kathleen Hirsch wrote in the Boston Globe, embracing single-cardom led to a change of perspective in other areas of their lives. In her words, "The first thing that started to happen was that we felt better about ourselves, less dependent on one of the many energy-hogging machines in our life." Then Kathleen and her husband realized that a new frugality started seeping into other aspects of our existence. Fewer four-star hotel stays and taking on the weekly yard care themselves became the norm. Less online shopping. They got bicycles for errands around town. They added vegetables and edible greens to their flower garden. In brief, Kathleen wrote, our life became more interesting. It has been humbling to acknowledge that we needed a catastrophic fire to pressure us to begin this journey. Equally humbling to admit that our belated new habits will never offset decades of casual consumption and waste. We have acquired a new realism. Even the educated and well-intentioned, which, though friends may disagree, we consider ourselves to be, respond more readily to floods, droughts, fire, and disaster than we do to educational campaigns and climate rhetoric. The most significant change in our life recently has been a new gratitude. What we'd once regarded merely as the blank canvas for our pleasures and convenience, we now sense as holy ground. We know that reverence alone won't save the earth, but ditching a car has taught us that it can't be done without it. As Kathleen and her husband discovered, the search for the gospel treasure and pearl begins with understanding the real value of what we are searching for and the investment of time and energy required. Wisdom is realizing the authentic and lasting good we possess and being able to let go of the useless and distracting. Jesus likens the kingdom of God to a man who finds a buried treasure and sells all that he has so he can buy the field containing the treasure. It helps to know that in those days, ordinary people did not have banks. Only the rich had access to places where their possessions were secure. If ordinary people did have valuable things, the simplest and safest thing was to hide them under the ground. Of course, because of war or some other unforeseen calamity, they might have to leave a place suddenly and not be able to take their belongings with them. They might not be able to return, or they might die before they could do so. Someone else then might stumble on their treasure and, according to Jewish law, the finder could regard it as his own. In this parable, the man comes across the treasure, but the field where it is hidden does not belong to him. He sells everything he has in order to buy the field and its buried treasure. The second parable is similar. A businessman is looking for fine pearls. When he finds the one he wants, he sells everything he has in order to acquire it. What is the one really valuable pearl that we are willing to sacrifice everything for in order to have it? What is that buried treasure for which we would be willing to sacrifice everything? Perhaps you have already found your pearl of great price, that one thing that is worth everything and costs everything: marriage, parenthood, ministry, the single life, whatever your vocation is or will be. It is the unique way God calls each of us to participate in making the kingdom of God more of a reality. And with that vocation, God also gives each of us the talents or charisms we need to live that vocation. Some of those may be talents you are not even aware of yet. But, like the treasure buried in the field, your talents are already there, waiting to be discovered when the need arises. After all, God would not give you a vocation, but then deny you what you need to live that vocation. What kind of God would that be? Over the last few weeks, much of the world has been caught up in the spectacle of the World Cup. Think of the years of exacting and rigorous preparation and discipline those athletes subjected themselves to for the sake of that competition. For them, everything else was of lesser value. For us, living our vocation inherently says that everything else is of lesser value. It is the priceless pearl, the buried treasure that is worth everything and then some. That level of dedication and commitment to the loving service of others, which is what any vocation entails, is also how we live the call to discipleship. Jesus gives us all these images of the kingdom that we have been reflecting on these last weeks: the seed on good soil, the yeast in the flour, the wheat in the weeds, the mustard seed, the buried treasure, the priceless pearl, to teach us how we are called to build up the kingdom. It is primarily through how we live our vocations, and also our careers, that we are given opportunities every day to make the kingdom of God a greater reality in our world. Simply put, these little parables are ways of reflecting on the life of a disciple, which, by virtue of our baptism, means all of us. Jesus puts it yet another way in the Sermon on the Mount when he says, "But seek first the kingdom of God and God's righteousness, and all these things, food, clothing, everything else, will be given you besides." Or again, when he said, "Where your treasure is, there also will your heart be." In still other words, St. Paul catches both God's calling and our response that Jesus describes as selling all to receive the treasure when he wrote, "For to those who love God and are called in God's plan, everything works out for good." To consider what selling all to buy the field might mean today, think of this. If the reign of God entails a consistent ethic of life, honoring the lives of the unborn, the enemy, the aging, the handicapped, the poor, the convicted, what residue of selfishness or vengeance or prejudice do I need to let go of to embrace such an ethic? In the days of pandemic, We learned of the healthcare workers and others deemed essential workers who, by choice or compulsion, risked their lives every day for the sake of the rest of us. We heard of people who make their vocation to help others, the pearl they value more than plans, safety, or comfort. It brought healing grace to all, and it cost some their health, even their lives. What would the world be like if our one really valuable pearl was something like world peace, based on justice for all, or the development of a classless society based on respect for all and the priority of need over want, or the worship of God through prayer, service, and a preferential option for the poor? All of these are bigger than any one of us can bring about. But every one of those can become a bit more real through how, day by day, we live our vocation. What would the world be like? Jesus says it would be like the kingdom. Thanks very much for listening. You're certainly free to share this with others if you like. And do consider subscribing to this free weekly gospel reflection. You can do that at our website, www.justanother.disciple.com. Once again, www.justanother.disciple.com. Thanks again.